Thank you, Alwyn. You're up next. How's it going? Yeah, you're a last minute ad, I remember from today, right?
Yes, I am.
All right, so where are you playing out of here?
I am playing out of Aria, so this is during the WSOP and the peak of all the craziness and everything that's happening.
Okay, so and what's the game size here? Is it 510?
Yes, we are playing the 510 game, and there is a $20 straddle that's been going on pretty much the entire time. So it's 510 20.
Is this a 3K cap game?
No, so Aria is actually the highest cap in Vegas for 510 at least. It's a $5,000 cap.
Okay.
And from what I've heard from the floor and through others, they've actually realized this is actually a bad idea, and they are reducing it back down to, I believe, 3K after the WSOP. So I haven't played there after WSOP, but I believe it is now going to be going back down to be more aligned with what Win and Bellagio have.
Well, because I remember the Win used to be like that was the biggest 510, right? Where it was uncapped, but then they put a cap on it or something like that at the Win Encore.
That's what I've heard too. I was just visiting WSOP or Vegas for WSOP, so I don't actually know what it is usually, but this is what I've heard from regulars.
I mean, I actually tend to agree with that. I think it's probably better for the overall game health to have a smaller cap. And you know, it's interesting what that does for. I mean, I had one of the biggest win rates, like in that my favorite game ever in LA, Hollywood Park, was 510. We basically played 510-20 with a $2,500 cap. It kept away a lot of the big crushers that would refuse to play with a cap, left a lot of the recreational players in. The game got deep anyways. It could get, better for the overall help. How deep are you here? What's the effective stacks?
So the villain is effective stack at 8,500.
Wow, and you cover him.
I cover him. I believe I had about like 98 or something like that.
All right, so you guys are super, super deep. Did you just buy in for the cap right away too?
I bought in for the cap, won a few big hands. I was up to like over 9K. This villain sits down. I believe he moved from a different table. Either a table broke or something happened, and he sits down with about 8,500.
Okay.
I have seen people go north when they switch tables or move tables because of a game breaking, so it's possible that he went north. But
right. Going north, of course, means just adding chips above the cap. That's usually not an issue in a 5K cap game. We saw that a lot at Commerce 1,500 cap at 510. But okay, so 8,500 effective. Okay.
Yep, 510-20 with a $20 straddle. Yep. I'm in the under the gun one with 6 of spades, 6 of diamonds, so pocket sixes.
Yep.
I open to $60.
So you make it 60 from +1. This is a full ring game?
This is a 8-handed game, correct.
So 8-handed game. Where just out of curiosity, is this the bottom of your opening range? Do you fold out like deuces through fives, or was it the type of game where you're opening any pair from up front?
Generally, I open those in a game where I'm very, very deep like this. I might start folding them a little bit more because of set over set.
Reverse implied odds?
Yes. In this specific configuration, there is somebody who's not involved in this hand, but somebody who has been extremely aggressive and bluffing a lot. And in that case, I might actually play a few more hands because I know that he overbluffs.
Interesting. So you go to 60, that's pretty small, 3x out of 3, 5, 10, 20. Maybe that was the standard open size. So you go to 60, okay.
It folds around to the small blind who calls and the big blind calls.
So the small blind calls. And is the small blind the villain?
Small blind is the main villain in this hand.
And the big blind calls, who's the middle blind? The middle blind calls?
Yes.
Okay. So that right there is kind of interesting, right? Because we got a 3 blind setup. And I think I even touched on this a little bit. No, I did touch on this in the flagship podcast last week, talking about some quick adjustments to 3 blind games. And I had said, in a 3 blind game, a lot of times if you see somebody from mid to late position open, and then you see a guy in the small blind call, he can be riped for squeezing if you're in the straddle or like in the middle blind, because it's usually not a strong range. And then I added the caveat though. And the other tip that I said is you should be playing a lot of V-pipping 3-bet or fold from the small blind in a 3 blind game against a mid to late position opener. But this is a slightly different setup. You guys are super deep, and I added that as a caveat. You're raising from early position, so you might have some non-fishy calls from the small blind. It's not terrible. Whereas if it was shallower and someone opened from the cutoff and then I saw a small blind call in a 3 blind structure, I'd be like, what the fuck is this guy doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So
what's interesting is actually, I mentioned there's a villain who's super aggressive. This is actually the big blind. And most hands before this, he's been squeezing extremely wide with very marginal hands, I would say. And he would just overbluff. And surprisingly, this hand he did not. Partially because he had been caught bluffing probably the hand right before this. But so I was a little surprised that he didn't squeeze and he merely called.
All right, so it's 180 and you're three ways.
I have 200 because of the straddle as well.
Okay, so 200 three ways.
There's no rake because this is a time rake.
Right, okay.
So the flop comes 8 of hearts, 8 of clubs, 6 of hearts.
Eight of hearts, 8 of clubs, 6 of clubs. So you flop bottom full.
Bottom full, and it's 6 of hearts. So there's a heart draw on board.
So
Correct.
8, 6 with 2 hearts and 1 club, and Hero's got 6s. Bottom's full, okay.
Correct. Small blind checks,
Mm-hmm.
big blind checks. I bet 120, so about 2/3 pot.
Now, let me just stop you there really quick here. So was this a tough game?
So there were probably 1 or 2 pros at the table, which I generally try to avoid pots with, but generally it was pretty weak. The lineup was pretty weak.
So it was not a tough game?
No, I wouldn't say
Okay.
so.
The only reason why I asked that was because if it was like a really tough game, you have to start to think about like, I think this is where you start to think about balance in a tough game when you're up at a level like this. Like, what am I doing with my range here in a certain spot? Now, if you're saying it's not a tough game, then you usually don't have to worry about this stuff. You can go more skewed towards value. What am I doing with my range here? And one of the things that jumped out at me is like, are you always betting like kings, aces, queens on boards like this against these two players?
On a board like this, given that I'm in position, I probably would.
Okay.
There are some flops that I would check, though. This is probably one that I would not, though.
So you go 120, which is like maybe about 60% of the pot. And the other interesting thing to note here, too, is that you unblock the 8, right? And you could possibly go for gold and go slightly larger, but if someone doesn't have an 8 and it's a paired board, I don't know how you're going to get a ton of action for some other things. So you go 120, okay?
Yep. I do see that there are a lot of draws. There's a straight draw. There's multiple straight draws, actually.
Yep.
A flush draw, none of which I blocked. So thought that I could get value from those. After I bet, the small blind check raises to 520. And then the big blind folds.
So the small blind raises to 520. Now, did you say that this was one of the pros or not?
This is not one of the pros.
Oh, okay. That's
At least from my perspective, he didn't seem like a pro.
The reason why that raises my eyebrows is, again, thinking about taking different lines against different sort of strength of opponents. Because like if you're playing against a decent player that you think you're a winning player up at this level, you're almost forced to call just because you would call with everything else, in a given spot with 6, because you're never going to put the 3-bet in with like overpairs, right? Or even flush draw. So you're almost forced to call against. It just seems very strange to bet 3-bet in a given situation against what would be a good player. Now, there might be some, in theory, 3-bets with some draws and with hands like 6s full or something like that. Off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure which combos those would be. But the other thing, though, too, is that if it's a guy that you don't think is strong, though, and he's check raising with a guy to your left, and you think that there's a possibility that he has an 8 or a combo draw, I could consider possibly 3-betting the flop here and just trying to get it in. Or he's not going to have check raise folds a lot in a given spot. If you know what I'm saying? Like, it really depends on like the strength of player here from the small blind.
Yeah, I think that should have factored more into my decision. At the time, my thinking was, if he has any draws, I don't want to fold those out. I'm also in position for the rest of the hand, so I should be able to get it all in theoretically.
But let me ask you a question, though. Like, do you think that any draw here is check raise folding? Like, I almost feel like if you put in a 3-bet, you might induce a draw to like come back over the top here from +1 versus like looking at you as +1 where you don't really have much 8x. And they don't even necessarily know if you're doing, you have like the 6s full. I mean, I just don't know if somebody, number one, is check raise folding and draw here against the preflop raiser. It's not like you're a field caller or something like that where you have all these middling cards, and you might even induce something too. Try to get the guy to maybe think he's going to move you off an overpair or something.
I could see that. I think generally, in my experience, people who aren't necessarily good, which was how I tagged this person, don't usually 3 or 4-bet on the flop with just a draw. especially this deep. But I mean, that's just based off of my personal experience.
And then the other setup though too with calling here is that, you know, if you set, your hand is going to look a lot stronger on a later street raise. And there are also some action killing cards that can come versus 8x if he does have an 8x. It's like, well, if I just always think in a situation like this, if you call and then you put in a raise later on, that's going to look in terms of what the actual hand is like more absolutely strong in terms of hand value than you actually putting in a 3-bet now. I'm not saying that you have to do it. I'm just thinking out loud here. In a given spot, you might have like an overcard that comes here on the turn, like a jack, a queen, or a king, where an 8 always, you know, he's just going to call a raise and thinks you could have like an over full or something like that. But okay, so small blind raise to the 520. Hero, the other guy gets out of the way, obviously, right? Big blind folds.
Correct.
Hero calls. And now you've put in, 1,040. So it's what, 1,240 here?
1240 is what I have.
Okay. Yep.
The turn comes the 4 of spades. So the 7-5 does get there, but pretty much other than that, it's a blank.
Yeah, 7-5 if small blind is calling here with, 5-7 and plays it like this, as a V-pip from the small blind to 3-blind type of format. Okay.
Yeah. So for all intents and purposes, I see it mostly as a blank. He bets 1,200.
1,200.
Yes, so pretty much pot.
So now he bets 1,200. And now, this is what I would be thinking about now. If you call, the pot's going to be 36, and you guys, you'll have what, like 67, right? 6,700 effective with $3,600 stacks. I mean, now that he takes that type of sizing here, yeah, I'd probably call here a lot, I think, at this point, because maybe he is running some sort of bluff here too, and you can get all the money in. I just feel like if you raise now, it's just like if he's got a hand like 9-10 of hearts or something like that, he just can't do anything, right?
Yeah. I think at this point, this SPR going into the river, if I were to just call, is a little bit awkward. But I was hoping at this point that he would, after showing so much strength, he would bet on the river, and then at that point I could raise all in.
Now, with that being said, a counter argument to this, though, but this we don't necessarily know this, is that sometimes if you deem that a guy's just never folding anyways, somehow if you saw his hand that it was 8x, or for some reason if you thought the sizing was such that he's just never folding anyways, he's got giant combo draw with one card to come that he's never folding, or he's got 8x, you could just get the money in now. I just wonder, though, if this guy is attacking you, and it seems like the SPR is such where you can still get the money in, that I probably would do a lot of calling here. So is that what you did? Hero calls?
I just called, correct.
All right. So now it is 3640. And again, you guys have about 6,700 left, right?
Yes, that's what he has left.
Okay.
I will admit at this point, I'm sitting in seat 2 or 3. He's sitting in seat like 6, so directly across from each other. Aria is also not the most brightly lit room, so I don't have the perfect view of his stack. And so at this point, I don't know that it's exactly 67. I'm just estimating that it's about 6 to 7K. So I don't know his exact stack size. So that does play into the next part.
Just one quick thing here. Somebody in the live chat said, Nick said calling is super strong. Yeah, but what if the caller had like aces or kings here? I mean, if you thought that the guy was draw heavy, I mean, what are you doing here, Alwyn, with aces and kings? On turn.
Based off of the flop and the turn, I'd probably call turn just to evaluate river and hope that he gives up. And on most rivers, I'd probably check back, probably doing the fifth street chicken type of strategy. But that really depends on the river.
I'm just saying that, it depends on what our definition of strong is. Sure, caller is going to definitely have something here, calling across turn, but it doesn't always have to be a boat, right? All right, so 3640, okay?
The river comes a 9 of diamonds.
9 of diamonds. So the final board is 88649, and hero with 6 is full. Okay.
So at this point, what I see is the flush draw is completely missed.
Right.
Most of the straight draws have missed other than 7-5, and unless they're a little bizarre with 10-7 somehow, that hits as well. But pretty much most of the straight draws and flush draws miss. And he now pauses for a little bit, and he checks.
He checks.
Correct. So I'm looking and I'm trying to evaluate what kind of hand he could possibly have. And based off of the strength that he's shown on the flop with the check raise and the turn, essentially a pot size bet, I put him on, like I said, either draws or 8x. And when I look at draws, if they all miss, pretty much any size that I bet, he's probably going to fold. So that doesn't really matter. On the other hand, if he has 8x, I'm trying to think, what can I get him to call with 8x? Now, one thing that I did notice is 9-8 gets there, which was very difficult for me to like. I saw that and I was pretty disappointed that I was hoping it wouldn't be a 9, but 9-8 does get there. But other than that, I still beat most 8x's.
So a 9 is different than a deuce in the sense that it's possible it's something that he could possibly be v-pipping that is now full, as opposed to like a deuce. I think that we can totally throw out that a guy's ever playing 9-9 like this based upon turn sizing, right, to 1200. I mean, it just seems really kind of bizarre. I guess my other question is, does he check an 8 here? Does he, if as played, if he has an 8 here, does he check? I mean, you're coming in from a raise from +1. So if I had an 8 and it kind of looks like you are loaded up with a lot of overpairs here from +1, why would I check now? Again, it is kind of a strange one because small blind calls, but like if I had ace 8 here, why would I check now?
The only reason I could think of is if he has 8x, then that means that puts me more likely to have a draw since he has one of the 8s. So if I have the draws and the pot is so big, instead of betting where I'm definitely going to fold with the draw, it's more likely that he could check to induce a bluff for me if I was drawing and missed.
The only thing that I'd have to say about that is that you have to look at your entire range. Sure, you could have a draw, but you're going to have some sort of really, really good draw, I feel like, to call across 1200 on the turn. Like, even if you had like ace king of hearts, ace queen of hearts, something like that, number one, are you calling across turn to a pot-sized bet? That's the first question that I have. The other question, though, too, is that like, if you're the one with a draw in your spot and you miss and he checks river, are you really bluffing like a busted draw here when you're the one that has the draw? So if I'm him, and I don't even know if first of all, I don't think you have many draws because of the line that's happened. I don't know if you're bluffing a draw. You very well might just give up. Why would I want to give up on that overpair portion of your range that you're just going to check back now, but that you would otherwise call to a bet? I'm just out of the villain's perspective. That's why I think like if I had a hand like ace 8, I don't know. I don't know. I would just think that I would bet here a lot. Now, who knows what this guy is doing? It's just something, to possibly be said. But you still beat. I mean, I think you have to value bet though, right? I mean, we're not even discussing check. Are we discussing checking back here?
I was not thinking about that at all. I was just thinking about sizing.
Sizing.
Yeah.
So
given that, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, well, there's two things that you could actually do here too. We don't usually talk about the second one. So if he is busted out on a draw and he's just not going to call, it is what it is. If you think he could be checking an 8 here and he's just never going to fold, I would tend to probably bet on the larger. I mean, if a guy is playing 8x in this way and he checks the river, is he going to fold to an all-in in terms of like betting on the larger side? The second thing that you could do, because usually people aren't playing deep enough to arrive at this type of stack depth, could you ever put out like a little bet that might want to get jumped on? And what I mean is like one of these things where he's given up and now you make it look like you're going for some thin value here and you induce a hand that was otherwise going to give up to try to make a play at you. Like I'm talking about betting like 700-800 or something like that. That's kind of where I see like both of these. I don't know about like sort of in between in a spot like this. So
yeah, I wish I had thought about that more in a moment because I do agree that I think the two bet sizes I should be considering is either an all-in where he'll probably tank call with any 8
or straight, or somehow if he has a straight or something, like a, yeah.
or a small one to induce a raise. I think in the moment I wanted my bet to look bluffy and to look easier to call. So I just grabbed all of the big chips I had, and I just threw it into the pot, which was 4 1K chips and a $500 chip.
So you bet 4,500.
Yes.
So you're saying in retrospect, if you're going to bet 4,500, you should have just moved all in. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because even though it sounds like a big difference, 6,700 versus 4,500. If you look at the size of the pot, it's really a 1.8x pot versus a 1.2x pot, which is really not that much of a difference.
Right. And people are in the live chat talking about bet folding. Of course, Kiro's not. I don't think Kiro's going to at this point. He only started with 6,700 left to the river, and then that second alternative that I said, like the whole point of betting tiny is you are not going to bet fold. You're trying to induce. So when you take those two sizings, there is no real room for bet folding. So you go 4,500, but you wish when you took this sizing that you probably wish it would have been more skewed towards the all-in sizing.
Yeah, I think the best option would have been all-in. I think the second best option would have been to try and induce. I am curious, though, in terms of inducing, what size you think would be best where it could actually induce, because obviously too small or too big would lead to some issues.
Well, I was kind of thinking of something like 800, but then, if you get just called by an 8, you're walking away. You're going to have to take a lap around the table, right? Like if he had an 8 here. So, okay, so you go 4,500, and what happened here?
He tanks for quite a long time, probably like 2 or 3 minutes, and then eventually calls. I show my hand, and then he angrily chucks ace-8 offsuit into the muck and walks away from the table.
Ace-8 off. Well, I think you would have got the all-in, right? You would have got the all-in.
In retrospect, call. I think an all-in.
Ace-8 off. He's v-pipping ace-8 off from the small blind. Jesus.
It's WSOP.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because when you go back and look at the entire hand, that's one where if I were you, I'm not trying to dig at you personally, but if I'm here in this spot, like I'm kind of mad at myself here when you don't stack the guy here with a nut versus like what is almost like a second nutish. I mean, I know it's not nut versus second nut, but in it's very good hand versus very good second best hand. And then you ask yourself, why am I playing? Sometimes you can get into situations, and this would be if you are playing with like at a table where there are really strong players, if you're not maximizing very good hand versus very good second best hand, if you're not getting all the money from the weaker player through whatever ends up happening, you are putting yourself at a disadvantage if you're deep with the other good players, especially if they have position over you, because now sometimes you get into a situation where you're losing the maximum against the good players and you're not necessarily getting all the money in. And then you have to take a step back and it's like, why am I necessarily playing this deep? I'm not saying that's, just in this specific situation, but just as a general take, like overall. But yeah, at some point here, Alwyn, if you put the extra bet in, whether it's through 3-betting flop or raising turn, you're going to get the money in, right?
Yeah.
But I don't mean to be results oriented. It's just,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. After I shared this hand with a few of my friends, they definitely said if you had played this a little bit differently, you could have gone it all in and you would have won 2,000 more at least, and would have been an even bigger pot. So I totally agree.
I think turn play is fine when he goes 1,200. I think turn play is fine. The question is, do you 3-bet flop and then you're sizing at the end? It would have been interesting if you bet 800 on the river, like what he would have done. But if you did go like real small and he just called with ace-8, that's and it kind of gets into like the mind of somebody, this particular guy. Now, I'm never v-pipping ace-8 off in the small blind, but I still don't know. I still think if I'm taking a line here with, like, say I called with ace-8 suited, I don't know why I would check the river. I don't have to take like an all-in sizing. I can take almost like a block sizing that's going to try to force you to call with with overpairs that you're like bluff catching, like aces, kings, something like that. What if he bet on the river like 1500? I assume you're going to move all in, or is the 9 scaring you here?
The 9 would be scary, but honestly, if he has 9-8, that one hand, and he gets there on a river, I mean, so be it. It is what it is.
Yeah, because what about every other 8 that he has? Now, again, 9-8 might be a hand that he VPIPs supposedly a 9-8 suited, and he's not supposed to have like 10-8, Jack-8, Queen-8, but he has Ace-8, and here he's got Ace-8 off, so. Anyways.
Yeah. Ironically, he may have saved money by checking river, because if he had bet and I raise all in, maybe he still calls that because he considers himself priced in.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the call, Alwyn. I appreciate it.